My mother-in-law gave my daughter a cake for her birthday. It nearly killed her, and she called it helping her build strength. I'm Marin Caldwell. We live in a cedar-paneled house just off Glasslake's shoreline, where the mornings smell like pine and fresh rain. My daughter Isla had just turned 10, and all I wanted was a backyard party filled with music frosting and the kind of laughter that stays in your bones. Instead, I ended up on the floor screaming her name, pressing an EpiPen into her thigh, while her lips turned blue. People always talk about grandmotherly love like it's made of quilts and lemon drops. But in Delilah Caldwell's world, love is correction. Love is control. And apparently, love includes walnuts. From the day I married Silas, she made it clear I wasn't the kind of woman who should raise a Caldwell child. I didn't bake the right way. I didn't speak soft enough. I didn't defer. But nothing, not her cold remarks, not the passive insults, prepared me for the glittery pink box she handed Isla that day. What would you do if someone wrapped poison in a ribbon and smiled as your child reached for it? If you've ever been gaslit in your own kitchen? If you've ever whispered, "I knew it too late," leave a comment. Let's talk. And if you believe protecting your child should never be up for debate, subscribe. This story is just beginning. Glasslake was supposed to be a fresh start. That's what Silas called it when he accepted the position at the university downtown. Closer to family, he'd said, arms wrapped around my waist, Isla spinning circles in the living room with her stuffed dolphin. Better for all of us. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to think that maybe, just maybe, the quiet town, wrapped in evergreens and postcard views, could feel like home. But I never forgot the look on Delilah's face the first time we pulled into their gravel driveway, the way her lips tightened when she saw my jeans and sneakers instead of a dress. The way she hugged Isla like I wasn't even standing there. From the start, Delilah treated motherhood like a competition I didn't know I'd entered and was destined to lose. She'd rearrange my spice rack without asking. Rewash Isla's clothes like my detergent wasn't good enough. Once she even replaced our living room curtains because she said beige was too depressing for a child's spirit. Silas called her quirky. I called it exhausting. But the worst part wasn't what she did to me. It was what she started doing to Isla. At first, Isla loved her visits. Delilah was all honey and Sunday dresses in front of her, playing tea party, braiding her hair, whispering stories about when Silas was little. And I wanted that for Isla. I did. I never had grandparents growing up. My own parents left scars where love should have been. I wanted better for her. I wanted family to mean something good. But Delilah always had a way of slipping past boundaries, like they were optional. She started slipping Isla treats behind my back. Cookies I didn't recognize, little muffins she said were just flour and fun. Isla, sweet and polite, never questioned her. But I did. I'd find crumbs with unfamiliar textures. Once I picked up Isla's lunchbox and caught a whiff of something faintly nutty, my whole body tensed. Isla is deathly allergic to tree nuts. We found out when she was 3. A single bite of almond nearly closed her throat before we got her to the ER. Since then, every meal is an act of vigilance, every snack a check, every party a plan. Delilah knew that. We told her. We sat down, showed her the doctor's letters, explained the risk over and over. But she had this look whenever we spoke, like she was humoring us. Like we were overreacting. She needs a stronger immune system, she once said, waving a spoon of homemade granola like it was gospel. A little exposure won't kill her. It'll help her adapt. Help her adapt. As if near-death experiences were vitamins. Silas would shake his head, chuckle awkwardly, and change the subject. He hated conflict, especially with his mother. I think part of him still saw her as the woman who sewed his Halloween costumes and made blueberry pancakes on Sundays. Not the woman who steamrolled boundaries with a smile and a silver tray. I tried to explain how it made me feel. How her presence in our home felt like an erasure. That I'd survived a childhood of criticism. I wasn't about to let Isla grow up thinking love means being fixed. Silas said he understood, but there was always hesitation in his eyes. So I learned to smile tightly, to check everything twice, to pack Isla's food in color-coded containers with notes and warnings. I told myself it was worth it for Isla to have a full family, for Silas to feel like he hadn't given up home. But some nights after Isla went to bed, I'd sit in the kitchen alone, staring at the fridge covered in her drawings, and wonder if I was failing by staying silent, because Delilah wasn't softening, she was getting bolder. And deep down, I knew it wasn't a matter of if something would happen, it was when. Delilah believed that if it wasn't her way, it was the wrong way, including Isla's health. She didn't yell. She didn't throw tantrums. No, her weapon of choice was condescension wrapped in lace. And the more I tried to set boundaries, the more she tested them. It started small. She began correcting Isla's posture at the dinner table, offering her tips on how little girls should sit or not interrupt grown-ups. Isla would glance at me confused, unsure if she'd done something wrong. I'd reassure her later in whispers, but those whispers piled up and they started to wear us both down. Then came the snacks. I found a crumbled cookie in Isla's coat pocket one afternoon. Not just any cookie, an almond biscotti. My chest went tight. Isla said Grandma gave it to her after school, but told her not to tell Mommy because Mommy worries too much. I remember Isla's voice small, hesitant, like she wasn't sure who to trust anymore. When I confronted Delilah, she laughed. "Oh, Marin," she said, waving her manicured hand. It was just one cookie. It didn't even touch her lips. She didn't eat it. What's the harm? The harm, I wanted to scream, was that she'd handed my daughter a loaded weapon and called it love. I told Silas, sat him down in the kitchen, the air heavy with garlic and dread. He listened, but his eyes darted to the wall, the floor, anywhere but mine. "She means well," he muttered. "She was raised differently." "Differently," I said, voice rising. "Silas, she's testing Isla's allergy like it's a science project." He pinched the bridge of his nose. "You're not wrong, okay? I don't know how to talk to her. She doesn't listen to me either." I stared at him, waiting for more. Waiting for him to say, "We'll stop sending Isla over. I'll talk to her. I'll protect our daughter." But all I got was silence. That silence settled over our home like fog. Thick, blinding, dangerous. I began to double-check Isla's backpack every day. I wrote labels on every lunch. I stopped letting her stay alone at their house. I said it was because of her school schedule, but really it was because I couldn't trust the woman who watched Isla with eyes full of judgment and hands full of risk. Delilah noticed. She stopped pretending to be sweet. At a family dinner, she muttered loud enough for the table to hear. Back in my day, mothers didn't have to bubble wrap their children to keep them alive. Isla looked down at her plate, cheeks burning. Arthur, her husband, cleared his throat, tried to cut the tension. But it was too late. The damage was done. That night, Isla crawled into bed with me long after Silas had fallen asleep. She curled into my side and whispered, "Mom, is it bad that I didn't want to eat Grandma's cookies?" I hugged her so tightly she squeaked. "No, baby," I whispered. "That means you're brave." But inside, I was unraveling. Because no matter how careful I was, no matter how many warnings I gave, Delilah was still playing her game. Still believing she knew better. Still convinced that my daughter was a puzzle only she could solve. And the worst part, she was doing it with a smile. I could feel something building, something cold and sharp behind her kind eyes. A final test. A point to prove. And I knew she wouldn't stop. Until someone got hurt. I found peanut butter smudged on the strap of Isla's backpack. It was faint, just a sticky, oily patch smeared near the zipper. But I knew that smell in an instant. It hit me like a siren, like every muscle in my body remembered the first time Isla's throat closed up in the back of our car. I stood frozen in the mudroom, holding the bag like it had just hissed at me. My stomach lurched. My throat went dry. She hadn't brought anything peanut-related from school. I packed her lunch myself. Nut-free granola, apple slices, a yogurt cup sealed tight. I called for Isla. She was upstairs humming to herself as she rearranged her art supplies. When I asked her gently, trying to keep the panic from my voice where she'd been during recess, her answer made my blood run cold. "Grandma brought a sandwich to school," she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. She said it was a surprise. It was sweet and sticky. I only took one bite and it didn't taste right, so I threw it away. My knees nearly buckled. "Did you feel anything itchy weird?" I asked, checking her arms, her face, her breathing. "No," she shrugged. I spit it out fast. I kissed her forehead, murmured praise, told her how proud I was. But inside, I was screaming. Delilah had come to her school, without telling me, and given my child a sandwich laced with the one thing that could kill her. That night after Isla fell asleep, I waited for Silas in the kitchen. The silence between us had grown into something thick and heavy. But I didn't whisper this time. I didn't hold back. "She gave her peanut butter," I said. "At school." He stared at me pale. "Are you sure there was residue on her backpack?" Isla told me. She took a bite. His hands gripped the back of a chair. "Jesus, do you still think she means well?" I snapped, the anger catching in my throat. "Do you still think this is just how she was raised? She couldn't mean to hurt her," he said. But even he didn't sound convinced. I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. "She's not listening to us. She's not respecting Ayla's safety. She thinks she knows better than her doctors, than me, than you. And one day she's going to get Isla killed." He didn't respond, just stood there staring at the floor, lips parted, lost. And that was when it hit me. I was alone in this. Silas couldn't or wouldn't stand up to his mother, not fully, not in the way Isla needed. I realized then that the little flickers of doubt I'd had for months weren't just in my head. Delilah was escalating, testing boundaries, pushing limits, all under the polished mask of grandmotherly love. And I'd been trying to keep the peace, hoping she'd change, soften, listen. But people like Delilah don't soften, they calcify. There was no more space for politeness. No more benefit of the doubt. The line had been crossed. That night I sat on the edge of Isla's bed and watched her sleep. Her small hand curled around a plush dolphin, lips parted in peaceful breaths. I tucked the blanket tighter around her shoulders, then whispered what I hadn't dared say out loud before. "I won't let her near you again." And this time, I meant it. If no one else would protect Isla, I would. Alone, if I had to. The morning after I found the peanut butter stain, I rewrote every rule in our house. Isla's lunchbox was now sealed with double clips and a coded note only she and I understood. I called the school and updated her allergy file with a full risk warning. I even brought extra EpiPens and handed them to her teacher myself. Hands shaking, voice calm, heart on fire. Delilah's visits stopped. Completely. I told Silas I needed space. No negotiation. No drop-ins. No baked goods. No, "Oh, I just happened to be in the area." I didn't even pretend anymore. He didn't fight me, not directly, but he watched me like I was building a bunker around our lives. Like he didn't recognize the woman I'd become. What he didn't see was I was just waking up to the one I should have been all along. But Delilah noticed the wall. She could sense it the way a cat senses a locked door. And she started pushing. It began with phone calls. "I'm worried about Isla's development," she told Silas on speaker, knowing I was within earshot. "All this restriction, it's not healthy. She needs nutrients, protein. You can't raise a child on fear, Silas." I didn't respond. I just reached across the counter and turned off the speaker. Next she sent a letter. Yes, an actual letter. Folded in perfect thirds, sprayed with lavender perfume. In it she quoted articles from fringe nutrition blogs about desensitization therapy and childhood immunity. She wrote phrases like, "Don't let your wife's anxiety dictate Isla's growth, and you were raised just fine." Silas read it, folded it, didn't speak. That silence again, like a second betrayal. I stared at him from across the kitchen one night and asked, "Do you think I'm overreacting?" He flinched. "No, I think you're doing what you believe is right." "That's not what I asked." He looked down at his plate. "I think she thinks she's right too." I stood up, chest tight. "Then she can be right from very, very far away." But it wasn't over. At school pickup one Thursday, Isla ran to me with a card in her hand. Pink, glittery. Delilah's handwriting on the envelope. "She was in the parking lot," Isla said, breathless. "She told me not to tell you." I felt the edges of my vision blur. Inside the card, a note, folded cash, and a recipe for immune-boosting muffins. Underlined almond flour, raw honey, crushed walnuts. I called Silas right there in the school parking lot, hands shaking. She showed up at the school again. When today? She gave Isla money and a recipe. Almond flour, walnuts. He sighed. "I'll talk to her." "No," I said. "You won't. Because this isn't a conversation anymore. This is war." That night I changed the locks on our house. Not metaphorically. Literally. I called a locksmith. Sat on the front steps in the cold while he installed the new hardware. When Silas came home and saw it, he didn't speak. Just in case, I said. He nodded slowly. Then he said the first honest thing in weeks. "I'm scared too." I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I just nodded back. "Then stand beside me. Or stand back." Delilah had made her move. The next one would be mine. I didn't know how or when, but I could feel it coming. The storm had gathered, and I was done waiting for the lightning to strike. The cake was beautiful, frosted in pale pinks and creams swirled with Isla's name in delicate cursive. A tower of elegance wrapped in shimmering foil and ribbon nestled inside a glittery box that looked too expensive to ignore. It wasn't mine. I'd baked Isla's real birthday cake the night before chocolate, her favorite. I double-checked every ingredient, every surface. Clean bowls, clean utensils, nut-free everything. It was in the fridge untouched, waiting for candles and laughter. So when Delilah stepped into our backyard, holding that box, wearing her signature cream blazer and a smug smile, my stomach flipped. Surprised, she said, voice too bright. A special gift for my special girl. I saw Silas stiffen. I saw Arthur look down at his shoes. And I smiled. Because Isla was twirling in her new dress, cheeks pink with joy, music thumping from a Bluetooth speaker, because balloons bobbed in the breeze, because I didn't want to ruin it. Not yet. Delilah placed the box on the table like it was a crown jewel. Isla squealed and ran over. "Grandma, it's huge, open it, sweetheart," Delilah cooed. "Right now." I stepped forward slowly. My hands felt disconnected from my body. The foil crackled. The ribbon fell away. Inside that cake, perfect. Terrifying. "Mommy, look," Isla beamed. "It has my name." She reached for the plastic fork on the side, sliced a corner, took a bite. Time stopped. She blinked. Chewed once. Froze. Then she dropped the fork. "Mom," she croaked, and collapsed. Her knees hit the grass with a soft thud. Her arms went slack. She clutched her throat, eyes wide with confusion, then panic. Everything blurred. Someone screamed. Maybe it was me. Isla, I dropped to my knees, grabbed her face. Her lips were turning blue. Her breath came in gasps, sharp and shallow. Silas shouted something. I didn't hear. My purse, where was my purse? My hands fumbled with the zipper, yanked it open. Found the EpiPen. Jabbed it into her thigh through the tulle of her dress. She convulsed slightly, still gasping. "Call 911, I roared. Now parents were frozen children crying. The music kept playing, too cheerful, too cruel. I cradled Isla in my lap, stroking her hair, whispering her name over and over. Silas was on the phone with emergency dispatch, voice cracking. Arthur knelt beside me, hand on my shoulder, silent. And Delilah. She stood by the table, arms crossed, expression unreadable. In the ambulance, I sat with Isla's head on my lap. She was still breathing, barely. Her face was pale as snow. Her eyelids fluttered. "Stay with me," I whispered. "Don't you leave me." She didn't respond. At the hospital, they rushed her into emergency care. Monitors beeped, wires tangled. Oxygen mask pressed to her face. I sat in a plastic chair that squeaked every time I shifted. Silas paced the hallway. Nurses moved past us in soft shoes and serious silence. Delilah arrived half an hour later. No tears, no panic. Just a purse, her lipstick perfect. "I told you," she said, voice cool. "A little exposure builds strength. This reaction, it's your fault for sheltering her." My hand curled into a fist. "You poisoned my daughter," I whispered. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It was just walnut. She barely touched it. She almost died. She's dramatic like you." That was when Silas snapped. "Mom," he said, his voice louder than I'd ever heard. "You're done. I don't care what your intentions were. You don't get to gamble with her life. Ever." Delilah blinked, shocked maybe that her golden boy had finally spoken. But it was too late. Isla was lying unconscious in the next room, and the cake that almost killed her still sat in the hospital's evidence fridge, covered in pink frosting and flecked with crushed walnuts. The hospital smelled like bleach and recycled air, the kind of sterile chill that clings to your skin even under layers. I sat beside Isla's bed, listening to the rhythmic beep of her monitor, counting the rise and fall of her chest. She was stable now, breathing on her own color, slowly returning to her cheeks, but she hadn't woken up yet. Each second crawled like glass across my spine. Silas sat across the room, elbows on knees, staring at nothing. His face was pale, hollowed out. I didn't speak to him, not yet. Not until I knew Isla was truly safe. Arthur was the only one who dared break the silence. "She's strong," he whispered. Voice hoarse. "Tough like you." I looked at him and nodded once. There were no words. Then Delilah entered the waiting room. She didn't knock, didn't lower her voice. She walked in like this was a dentist appointment and not the aftermath of a near-death experience she'd caused. Her heels clicked against the tile floor, too loud, too confident. She sat down with a huff and crossed her arms. I still don't see what all this fuss is about. Silas stood so fast the chair scraped back. You need to leave. She raised a brow. Excuse me. You heard me, he said, jaw clenched. You nearly killed our daughter. She had a reaction. It happens. It happened because you fed it to her. Because you ignored every doctor, every warning, every time Marin told you no. Delilah rolled her eyes. You've always been so sensitive. Arthur stepped in. Delilah, enough. Oh, now you're turning on me, she snapped. For what, a little misunderstanding over cake? Arthur's voice was low, devastated. No, for decades of ignoring boundaries and calling it love. Her face cracked for the first time, just slightly. You're all so dramatic, she muttered. This generation afraid of everything. I was helping her build tolerance. She's not a lab rat, I said. She's a child, our child. And she's terrified of you now. Delilah stood straightening her coat like she hadn't just been accused of attempted murder. I did what I thought was best. You're just threatened by the bond, Isla, and I have. That's all this is. Threatened, I echoed. You mean the bond where you tell her to hide things from me, where you sneak allergens into her food? That's not a bond. That's manipulation. Silas stepped beside me. She's not seeing Isla again, he said firmly. Delilah laughed bitter and loud. You don't mean that, Arthur sighed. We do. Her eyes darted between us, waiting for someone to cave, but no one did. And for the first time her voice faltered. You're all making a mistake. No, I said. You did. And now we're cleaning up the blood while you sip tea. Delilah stormed out without another word. The next morning, Isla finally opened her eyes. Mom, she rasped. I kissed her forehead, tears already spilling. I'm here. I'm right here. Will Grandma come back? She asked quietly. My throat tightened. I looked at Silas. He nodded once. No, baby, I said, brushing her hair back. She won't. Her lip quivered and she blinked a few times. Good. And just like that, the final crack in Delilah's armor shattered for Isla, for Silas, for all of us. Later that day, we sat with the hospital social worker. She advised us to press charges, to take legal action. I hesitated. Not out of mercy, but exhaustion, pain. But then I remembered the cake, the glittery box, the pink frosting covering the flecks of walnut. And I said yes, because someone had to stand between Delilah and the next person she decided to fix. And this time, that someone would be me. I never imagined I'd see my mother-in-law in handcuffs, but I also never imagined I'd kneel over my daughter's unconscious body at her own birthday party, begging her to breathe. Justice doesn't care about appearances. It doesn't care if you're a well-known woman in Glasslake with a pristine front garden and a stack of church potluck ribbons. It cares about facts. And the facts were clear. Delilah Caldwell had knowingly given a child with a severe nut allergy a cake filled with crushed walnuts. She had access to medical documents. She'd received verbal warnings, multiple times. And she still brought that cake. She still watched Isla take a bite. And she still stood there, arms crossed, unmoved, as Isla collapsed. That's what the prosecutor said in court. Her words echoed through the room like a hammer cracking through porcelain. I sat beside Silas at the front. Isla wasn't there, of course. She was home recovering, coloring sunflowers with Arthur in the living room. She didn't need to see any of this, but I did. I needed to be there for every word, every photograph, every recorded voicemail Delilah had left, insisting we were overreacting. Delilah's lawyer tried everything. She didn't mean to harm her granddaughter, he said. She believed she was helping. She believed wrong, the judge replied. And her beliefs nearly resulted in the death of a minor. The cake was presented as evidence, what was left of it anyway. Lab tests confirmed the presence of multiple allergens. The letter Delilah had given Isla with a muffin recipe using almond flour was entered into the record along with Isla's backpack, still stained. But what ended it, what made the whole room go still, was Arthur's testimony. He stood, hands shaking slightly, and spoke directly to the judge. My wife has always believed she knows better, he said. She dismissed doctors. She dismissed her own son. She dismissed Marin. And now my granddaughter will carry this trauma for the rest of her life. I can't defend her anymore. When he stepped down, Delilah's face crumpled for the first time. It wasn't grief, it was disbelief. Because for once no one was standing beside her. When the sentence was handed down 3 years for felony child endangerment with mandatory payment of Isla's medical expenses, Delilah didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She just sat there, jaw clenched, trembling as the bailiff led her away. I wish I could say I felt triumphant, that I smiled as the gavel fell. But all I felt was release. A weight lifted off my chest. A rope untied from around my ribs. I wasn't happy she was going to prison, but I was grateful Isla would never again sit across from that woman and wonder why Grandma never listened. Word spread quickly in Glasslake. The potluck committees, the book club women, the charity boards. One by one they pulled away. Not because I said anything, but because Delilah's mask had cracked wide open and everyone saw what had always been behind it. Even her own siblings stopped calling. Even the women who once praised her traditional values started using the word reckless. Arthur filed for divorce quietly just a week after the sentencing. He didn't tell her, he didn't have to. He chose us, me, Silas, and Isla. He said he was too old to watch someone burn down the family and pretend it was a Sunday roast. We filed a restraining order next. Legal permanent. Not just while she served her sentence, but forever. No contact, no letters, no future second chances. Isla was safe and now protected. Back home, Silas held me in the quiet of our kitchen while the dishwasher hummed and the afternoon light poured through the windows. He kissed my temple and whispered, I should have listened sooner. I didn't respond. Some apologies aren't words, they're actions, and for the first time in years, he was finally acting like the man I married. Not a son caught between loyalties, but a father who finally understood the price of silence. On Isla's 11th birthday, we lit the candles again. Same backyard, same folding tables, same string lights swaying gently in the trees. But this time, there was no glittery gift box from anyone we didn't trust. No tension beneath the laughter. No eyes watching, waiting to criticize. Just Isla, alive, laughing, and safe. Arthur handed her a fishing rod, wrapped in brown paper and duct tape. He'd been teaching her how to cast lines down at the lake on Saturdays. Silas flipped pancakes on a griddle shaped like dolphins, and I brought out the cake nut-free chocolate extra frosting, her name spelled in pink sugar pearls by my own hand. Isla beamed. Her eyes sparkled again, not with confusion or fear, but with joy. When the candles flickered in front of her, she took a deep breath and whispered a wish I didn't hear. Then she blew them out. No collapse, no sirens, just cheers. A few weeks after the trial, Isla started seeing a therapist, a soft-voiced woman named Kendra, who let her draw instead of talk. At first, Isla was quite withdrawn, but slowly the colors came back to her crayons. One afternoon, she brought me a picture, a bright yellow sun breaking through gray clouds shining down on a little girl, holding hands with a dolphin. That's me, she said. After. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I did both. Silas and I started therapy too, to repair the fractures that had formed when we let silence take over. We learned how to speak honestly, to listen without flinching, to set boundaries not just for Isla, but for ourselves. And Arthur, he stayed. Not just as a grandparent, but as a steady presence. He never once asked us to forgive Delilah. He only said, thank you for keeping her safe. The restraining order held. Delilah's letters, if she sent any, never reached us. Her name became something Isla didn't say, and I didn't force it. Healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means distance. It means choosing peace over guilt. And as I watched my daughter dance barefoot in the grass with frosting on her nose and sunlight in her hair, I understood something deep in my bones. A mother's love is not passive. It is fire. It is shield. It is refusal. I didn't win a battle. I reclaimed my child's future. And in the quiet of a small Oregon town, under strings of warm light, we began again on our terms, in our time. Together.